You know that story about Ben Franklin flying a kite and there's a key attached, the lightning comes down, and when you see this story in all of the different cartoons and different media that this is depicted, it almost looks like that lightning bolt is his creativity. Well, I know we all know that creativity is not actually a lightning bolt, but I do find that a lot of new writers really expect that the creativity is just going to hit them and it's going to solve all of their problems. Well, I have good news and I have bad news. The first is you can find ways to harness that spontaneous creativity that does feel like a lightning strike from above. But the bad news is that lightning bolt creativity, it will never be enough. In this video, I'm going to tell you what is, how you can harness the power of electricity to help your writing, just in the exact same way that Ben Franklin used that kite and that key to discover electricity. So I think this will probably sound familiar to you. You've got this idea, and maybe it's a book, maybe it's a YouTube channel, maybe it's some other type of content you want to create. And it can feel almost like something's under your skin, like you cannot wait to get that idea out. You've just got to get that inspiration. It's going to tell you how to get it on paper. You're going to know how to do it because it's just going to feel right. I used to see this all the time when I taught college public speaking. So public speaking really, just like writing, is a form of creative expression, right? And depending on what my students were interested in, they would be more or less creative, just so that they were building up those skills. That was the main thing I was concerned about. But you know, the number one reason in all my 15 years of teaching, the number one reason that people didn't finish their speech was because they never picked a topic. All right, so I think you can see where I'm going here. If we are just going to wait for that creativity to hit us, it can really stop us from taking action. That's what happened with my students, is they would wait, they would hear the idea that they were supposed to be talking about, kind of the general topic, and they would think, okay, I've got to think of the perfect idea. When it's right, I'm going to know, and it's going to be very, very clear kind of what to do next, what I want to say. And so they would wait and wait and wait and wait until it was speech day and they had nothing to present. My heart always really hurt for them. And in fact, as I got forward in my career, I started sharing that, and I found that that took care of so much, because I think it's in our nature to think that when creativity strikes, we will know, right? It's going to be kind of out of the blue. It feels kind of divine, right? It feels kind of like otherworldly. So I think it does make sense to think that we're going to wait and that's going to solve everything. The problem is, if you think creativity is going to strike like lightning and really put your path down for you to follow, usually you're going to be waiting long enough that that initial excitement, the real energy, the excitement of that new creative idea is going to have dissipated, or in the case of my students, the deadline that you had set is going to be passed. So how can we kind of break this down? Well, one thing, I always think is really helpful is to think about, where do these ideas come from? And so one of the things that I find to be a way of thinking that isn't exactly right is that we think it's creativity that is going to move our project forward. That is not correct. In fact, creativity does often come as a lightning strike inspiration. I bet you have been on a walk or in the shower and, oh my gosh, you knew what you needed to do. That's the creative spark, right? That part can come like magic. The part that never comes like magic is the process. So what I want to do in this video, I want to separate out the idea of creativity and the idea of process and structure and the way that we approach getting that creativity onto the page so we can share it with other people. Now, let me give you an example to really kind of drive home what I mean when I am comparing creativity with process. So I always find that this idea of the lightning strike creativity feels kind of old world. So the example that I find the most helpful is to think about the great painters. So let's think about Van Gogh. So this is, I find so interesting, what everybody knows about Van Gogh with the ear situation, right? I actually think the most interesting part about Van Gogh is that he was self-taught. Now, if you have ever taught yourself to do anything, you know that it is not smooth sailing. When you are teaching yourself, you are going to have to basically pay the price of the education through your mistakes. You just are gonna have to work toward that thing. You're gonna have to know that you're gonna fail a lot of times, but you're gonna get a little better and a little better each time. So it's easy for us to think like, oh, probably not for Van Gogh. Absolutely for Van Gogh, though. Van Gogh, just like the rest of us, as he was learning to paint, he had to paint over his canvases. He threw canvases away. He was trial and erroring it all the way through his entire painting career. He did not sit down the very first time he got the idea for Starry Night and put Starry Night on the page. If you're a visual artist or if you've ever kind of experimented with arts and crafts of any kind, you know this is true, right? You can have that perfect idea of what the painting is going to look like or what that project's going to look like. And then when you finish it, it's a little more like that nailed it meme that went around for a while, right? It's like, oh, the vision was great. That's the creativity. The process, you needed a little bit of help, right? Because painting is a very technical skill. All kinds of arts and crafts, technical. Writing is technical. So if you're starting out with this kind of creativity, but you don't have the structure or the process to support it, you'll have a great idea. You aren't going to be able to share it with anyone else. So with writing, we're not kind of looking at how do we do the brush strokes. With writing, though, there are very technical elements, and these are the number one reason probably that people reach out to me for help with coaching or our group program is that they want help thinking about structure. They want help thinking about what order should I put the stories in. They want help kind of how do I articulate this idea that I have? How do I go from the creativity, that spark that I've got, into actually translating that and getting that out of my brain so that I can share it with other people? Well, that is not a lightning bolt. Learning that process is going to take you some trial and error, no matter what, but also you might need some support and some training. You can self-teach if you want to, right? You can, Google YouTube videos and whatnot. Either way, you're going to need to get some help. You're going to need to get some answers because that vision, I guarantee that vision you've got, it is related to the process that you've seen other people use, whether you realize it or not. Okay, so having thought about then these two different things, this lightning bolt creativity and the kind of a longer, harder road of learning how the process works, what do we do? What do we do with that information? We give ourselves parameters. So in that speech class that I taught so many years, what I found was when I just said, do a speech, which of course I didn't say it quite that big, but we're going to do a speech, right? Pick a topic. Oh my gosh, that is just paralyzing, right? Of every topic that has ever existed, pick one. Well, how can anyone do that? What I found was when I started giving more specific details. So for example, you need to pick a speech topic and you need to talk about something that you see, hear, feel, or interact with every single day. Oh, okay. Well, then I started to have some ideas, right? I started to think, what do I do in my day? And what do I interact with? And who do I talk to? And what's interesting about it? Oh my gosh, spark of lightning, right? That came from not the sky, but from having parameters, having rules, essentially, and guidelines to follow. By limiting what we can do, it's paradoxical, right? We actually open ourselves up to all of these ideas that we probably would have looked right past if we hadn't had to work with them. And the reason is having a framework, having boundaries or rules, guidelines in place actually allows you to feel much, much safer with experimentation. Much. That makes sense, right? Because one of the places that I find people feel very unsafe is in any kind of an environment where you're going to get feedback right away and it might not be kind. So the college classroom is that. right? I always tried to be very, very kind to my students. I think I mostly accomplished that. But there still is always that fear of the grade. When you just say, experiment with literally anything you can think of, well, oh my gosh, well, what do you have in mind? How are you going to grade me? What are you going to compare it to? We don't know. If I limit how I'm going to look at this speech and how you should look at this speech, that makes it so much safer to experiment within that framework, right? I understand what I'm trying to accomplish in a little bit more specific way, and that lets me play around inside that specific area. So the way I always like to think of this, the way that I always have shared with clients and with students, is think about a dog park. Now, if you're not a dog person, go with me here. It also can work for a park where kids play, but I have a dog. I love her. So we're going to talk about dog parks. If I pulled up to a dog park with my sweet old lady, 16-year-old terrier in my car, and I got out and I saw that there was no fence around that dog park, you know what I'm not going to do is take her off the leash. I do not want her running outside the park. I don't want her to run into traffic. I don't want to have to worry about that. That's going to be so stressful for me, right? So that fence actually keeps her safe, and it helps me relax and just feel so much more comfortable. The same thing happens in your writing. You have that fence. Now that fence can be any number of things. It could be genre, so the type of book you're writing and what are the conventions of that genre, what do people expect from that genre. It could be the rules of, say, an assignment if you're studying somewhere. How long does this have to be? What kinds of things do I have to cover? It could be things like if you're SEO targeting and you're trying to think about for your business, how do you want to make sure your website gets found? That's a set of parameters. Any of these things are going to help you work within the boundaries and feel just much safer, right? So even though we tend to think like, oh, I don't want these rules, they're going to stifle my creativity, I promise you, you want the rules. You do not want a totally blank canvas, because a lot of the time what I find is that those rules and parameters and limitations are actually not opposite to the spark of creativity. They actually feed that spark of creativity because you feel safe. So if you have felt like, where has my creativity gone? I just can't find this spark. I have a counterintuitive solution for you, and it is you've got to get yourself a framework. Now, I know a lot of people feel really resistant to this when I say it, but things like an outline template where you look at how are narratives structured, how have they been structured since the beginning of storytelling. When you look at that outline, oh yeah, it's going to constrain your choices, right? It's going to limit what you can do. I bet that's going to actually help you see things a lot clearer. If you look at what are things that are typical in this genre I'm writing in. So I'm going to write an inspirational memoir. Well, how does that usually happen? What do other people do? What have other people done? Can I find a template? Can I find a set of rules? Can I find, some guidelines for how I'm going to get this to market? Those things are not going to limit you. They're going to propel you. So what I want you to do is the next time you're feeling like, I can't feel that spark. I've got this thing I want to get out, but I need the energy. I need the electricity and the lightning strike. I want you to embrace the fact that you can create that lightning strike. You can produce it by giving yourself the adequate structure that you need to play within. You can bound around like my old lady mutt in that dog park because there's a fence. You can play, you can experiment, and you're much more likely in that scenario to actually finish your project. It might not be beautiful. You're probably not going to paint water lilies the first time you sit down to write, right? But with each bit of experimentation, each bit of trial and error, each bit of support, outside guidance, you are going to get a little better and a little better and a little better until you can take what you have in your head. You can get it on the page. That's not lightning striking. That's learning about the process. So if you know that you are ready to write that memoir, if you've been thinking about it long enough, it's that kind of creativity under your skin and you just have to get this story out, I want you to think about whether it would be helpful to get some instruction. That doesn't have to be through Page and Podium. There are lots of classes that you can probably take locally. You can look for things online, YouTube videos. But if you are looking for really structured support that's going to help you from start to finish so that you can have that safety net where you can experiment, I want you to think about enrolling in our very first session of the Marketable Memoir method. All that is it's going to take that structure and that process and feed that into your creativity. You'll have the support that you need. You'll have experts that you can ask your questions to. You'll have community, and you're gonna have some of those guidelines and frameworks that I talked about earlier that are gonna really propel you forward in this project you wanna do. So I hope you'll like and subscribe and reach out if you feel like the Marketable Memoir method is right for you. I would love to see you there. So reach out to me, go to our website. All of the links are in our show description. And I cannot wait to hear about what you're working on. Happy writing, everybody.